You know, when you were just a little girl and talk when you were going to get married and have kids and a family, just dreaming of the best marriage ever and love forever? Well, that's how I dreamed of it and lived it until everything fell apart. Now, let's start with the real deal and good memories. At least to start. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in New York City when I first met Scott. I remember it like it was yesterday, though it's been over a decade now. I was working as a waitress at a small cafe near Union Square, trying to make ends meet while pursuing my dream of becoming a painter. He walked in, dressed in a sharp suit, his tie slightly loosened, and ordered a black coffee. There was something about the way he carried himself, confident yet approachable. He caught me staring and smiling, and I felt my cheeks flush. We started talking, and before I knew it, he came in every day, always sitting at my section. He told me he was a civil engineer, working on some big projects around the city. I was fascinated by his stories, and he seemed genuinely interested in mine. One day, he asked me out, and I said yes. That was the beginning of us. Our first date was at a cozy Italian restaurant in the West Village. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories about our lives. He told me about his dreams of climbing the corporate ladder, and I shared my passion for art. There was an instant connection, something I had never felt before. Over the next few months, we grew closer, spending every free moment together. He was my rock, my confidant, and I was his. We were inseparable, and it wasn't long before we realized we were in love. Scott proposed on a snowy evening in Central Park. He got down on one knee, holding out a simple yet beautiful ring, and asked me to spend the rest of my life with him. I said yes without hesitation. Our wedding was a small, intimate affair, held in a charming little chapel in Brooklyn. I wore a vintage lace dress, and he looked dashing in his tailored suit. As we exchanged vows, I knew I was making the best decision of my life. We were young, in love, and ready to take on the world together. Looking back, those early days were some of the happiest of my life. We were building a life together, full of hope and dreams. Little did I know how much things would change, how the weight of time and choices would shape our future. But at that moment, as we danced under the twinkling lights of our wedding reception, I believed we could conquer anything. We were Lacey and Scott, and our story was just beginning.
Thank you for watching Gaby's cheating stories. Please subscribe. It just take 1 second. Thank you.
After the wedding, we moved into a small but cozy apartment in the Upper East Side. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Scott was working long hours at his firm, but he always made time for me. We spent our weekends exploring the city, visiting museums, and trying out new restaurants. I continued to paint, though I hadn't yet found my big break. Scott encouraged me to keep going, telling me he believed in my talent. His support meant everything to me. Our first year of marriage was a whirlwind of love and adventure. We traveled to Europe for our honeymoon, visiting Paris, Rome, and Barcelona. It was magical, walking hand in hand through the streets of these beautiful cities, dreaming about our future. Scott was my partner in every sense of the word, and I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. We talked about starting a family someday, but for now, we were content just being together. But as much as I loved our life, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I wanted more stability, more security. Scott's job was demanding, and while he was climbing the ranks quickly, the stress was starting to take its toll. He would come home late, exhausted, and I could see the weight of his responsibilities in his eyes. I tried to be supportive, but I couldn't help feeling like we were drifting apart, even if only slightly. Still, we were happy. We had each other, and that was enough. Or so I thought. As the years went by, our lives began to change in ways I never could have anticipated. The carefree days of our early marriage were slowly replaced by the realities of adulthood, and I found myself longing for the simplicity of those first few years. But life had other plans for us, and our journey was far from over. A year into our marriage, Scott got a big promotion at work. He was now a senior project manager, overseeing some of the firm's most high-profile projects. I was so proud of him, but with the promotion came even longer hours and more stress. He was rarely home before 8 p.m., and our weekends together became fewer and farther between. I tried to be understanding, but I couldn't help feeling lonely. I missed him, missed us. It was around this time that I found out I was pregnant. I'll never forget the look on Scott's face when I told him. He was over the moon, scooping me up in his arms and spinning me around. "We're going to be parents," he kept saying, his voice filled with excitement. For the first time in months, I felt like we were truly connected again. This baby was going to bring us closer. I was sure of it. The pregnancy was tough. I was sick almost every day, and my energy levels were non-existent. Scott tried to be there for me, but his job kept him busy. I spent most of my days alone, painting and preparing for the baby's arrival. When Paul was born, it was the happiest day of my life. Holding him in my arms, I felt a love I had never known before. Scott was there too, tears in his eyes as he held our son for the first time. In that moment, I felt like we were a real family. But as the months went by, the reality of parenthood set in. Paul was a colicky baby, and I was exhausted. Scott tried to help, but he was so busy with work that I often felt like a single parent. We argued more, mostly about his long hours and my need for support. I knew he was doing his best, but I couldn't help feeling resentful. Still, I loved him and I loved our little family. We were figuring it out one day at a time. By the time Paul turned 1, Scott's career was thriving. He was now a vice president at his firm, and we were able to move into a bigger apartment in a nicer neighborhood. Life was good, but it was also hectic. Scott was traveling more for work, and I was left to manage the household and care for Paul on my own. It was a lot, but I tried to stay positive. After all, we were building the life we had always dreamed of. It was during this time that I found out I was pregnant again. This time, it was a girl. We named her May, and she was the perfect addition to our family. With 2 young children, my days were filled with diaper changes, feedings, and endless laundry. Scott was still busy with work, but he tried to be more present when he was home. He adored Paul and May, and seeing him with them made me fall in love with him all over again. But as much as I loved being a mother, I couldn't help feeling like I had lost a part of myself. My art had taken a back seat to motherhood, and I missed it. I missed the freedom to create, to express myself. Scott encouraged me to pick up my brushes again, but finding the time was nearly impossible. Still, I was grateful for our life. We had a beautiful home, 2 healthy children, and a bright future ahead of us. What more could I ask for? As the years went by, our lives became more routine, and I saw it coming, but you know when you see something coming and you can't just change it? Yeah, I feel it was coming sooner or later to our lives. Scott's career continued to soar, and I settled into my role as a stay-at-home mom. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. The stress of Scott's job was taking a toll on his health, and I was feeling more isolated than ever. Little did I know our lives were about to change in ways I never could have imagined. By the time Paul was 3 and May was a newborn, our lives had settled into a comfortable routine. Scott's career was at its peak, and we were financially secure. We had a beautiful home, a nanny to help with the kids, and the freedom to enjoy the finer things in life. But with that comfort came a sense of complacency. Scott was working harder than ever, and I was feeling more disconnected from him. I started to fill my days with activities outside the home. I joined a book club, took up tennis, and began socializing with other moms in our neighborhood. It was nice to have a life outside of motherhood, but it also meant spending less time with Scott. But I needed to find my own life, right? He didn't seem to mind, though. He was so focused on his work that he barely noticed my absence, and it didn't bother me because I know he was working for us, for our lovely family. I told myself it was just a phase, that things would get better once the kids were older. But as the months went by, I noticed changes in Scott. He was gaining weight, eating poorly, and rarely exercising. The stress of his job was taking a toll on his health, and I was worried. I tried to talk to him about it, but he brushed me off, saying he was fine. I didn't push it, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Then, one night, everything changed. Scott came home late, looking pale and sweaty. He collapsed on the couch, clutching his chest. I called 911, my hands shaking as I tried to keep it together for the kids. The paramedics arrived quickly, and Scott was rushed to the hospital. It was a heart attack, the doctor told me. He was going to be okay, but it was a wake-up call. Scott's health was in serious jeopardy, and something needed to change. I can't believe how that was one of the scariest nights of my life. To be honest, I felt something horrible that I didn't know how to handle. But come on, who can, right? After Scott's heart attack, our lives took a sharp turn. The man I had married, strong, ambitious, and full of life, was now a shadow of his former self. He was forced to cut back on his workload, but the damage to his health was already done. His doctor warned him about his cholesterol levels, his weight, and the stress that was eating away at him. Scott nodded along during the appointments, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. He hated feeling weak, hated the idea of slowing down. He had always been the provider, the one who carried the weight of our family on his shoulders. Now he felt like he was failing us. I tried to be supportive, to encourage him to take better care of himself. I cooked healthier meals, signed us up for a gym membership we never used, and even suggested therapy to help him manage his stress. But Scott was stubborn. He would smile and promise to do better, but then he'd slip back into old habits, late nights at the office, fast food on the go, and a constant stream of emails and calls that never seemed to end. I felt helpless, watching the man I loved slowly deteriorate. I wanted to fix him, to fix us, but I didn't know how. Meanwhile, my own life was changing in ways I hadn't anticipated. With Paul in preschool and May still a baby, I found myself with more free time than I'd had in years. I started filling my days with activities that made me feel alive again. I joined a book club with some of the other moms in our neighborhood, took up tennis at a local club, and even started attending charity events with Scott's colleagues' wives. It was exhilarating to be out in the world again, to feel like more than just a mom. But it also meant spending less time at home, less time with Scott. The more I ventured out, the more I realized how disconnected Scott and I had become. We barely talked anymore, and when we did, it was about the kids or his work. The intimacy we once shared was gone, replaced by a polite distance that felt like a chasm. I missed him, missed us, but I didn't know how to bridge the gap. And then there was Daniel, my tennis instructor. He was charming, attentive, and everything Scott wasn't at the time. It started innocently enough. A compliment here, a lingering touch there, but before I knew it, I was in too deep. The affair was a mistake, one I regretted almost immediately. But in the moment, it felt like an escape, a way to fill the void that had grown between Scott and me. I told myself it was just a fling, that it didn't mean anything. But deep down, I knew I was betraying Scott, betraying our family. I wanted to end it, to come clean and try to repair my marriage, but I was too afraid. Afraid of losing Scott, afraid of what it would do to our kids, afraid of facing the truth about myself. Scott never confronted me about the affair, but I could tell he knew. There was a sadness in his eyes, a quiet resignation that broke my heart. He started spending even more time at work, burying himself in projects as if to avoid the reality of our crumbling marriage. I wanted to reach out to him, to tell him I was sorry, that I still loved him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I poured myself into my new social life, trying to distract myself from the guilt and the pain. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the truth was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. I had made a terrible mistake, one that would haunt me for the rest of my life. And as much as I tried to convince myself that things would get better, I knew deep down that they wouldn't. Our marriage was broken, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be fixed. The breaking point had come and gone, and now we were left to pick up the pieces, if there were any pieces left to pick up. Scott's health continued to deteriorate, and despite his best efforts, he couldn't seem to recover. He was in and out of the hospital, and I was constantly worried about him. Then one Saturday morning, everything changed. Scott had just gotten out of the shower when he collapsed. I found him on the bathroom floor, unconscious. I called 911, but it was too late. He was gone. The days and weeks that followed were a blur. I was numb, going through the motions of life, but feeling nothing. The kids were devastated, and I struggled to hold it together for them. I felt like I had failed Scott, failed our family. The guilt of my affair weighed heavily on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had contributed to his death. When Scott's will was read, I was shocked to learn that he had left everything to the kids. He had set up trust for them, ensuring they would be taken care of when they came of age. All he left me was a small apartment he had bought as an investment years ago. It was a clear message. He knew about the affair, and he wanted me to know that he knew. I was heartbroken, but I couldn't blame him. I had betrayed him, and now I had to live with the consequences. In the years that followed, I tried to rebuild my life. I moved into the small apartment Scott had left me, and I focused on raising Paul and May. They were my everything, and I was determined to be the best mother I could be. But the guilt of my affair and Scott's death never left me. I was haunted by the choices I had made, the pain I had caused. Paul and May grew up quickly, and as they got older, they began to ask questions about Scott's death. I tried to be honest with them, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the whole truth. I didn't want to tarnish their memory of their father or of me. But as Paul approached his 21st birthday, I knew the truth would come out. Scott had left him a letter to be opened when he turned 21. I didn't know what it said, but I had a feeling it would change everything. The day Paul turned 21, I felt a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I knew what was coming. Scott had left him a letter, one that was meant to be opened on this day. I had spent years dreading this moment, years hoping that somehow the truth would stay buried. But Scott had always been a man of principle, and he wanted Paul to know the truth, even if it meant destroying the image I had worked so hard to preserve. Paul sat at the kitchen table, the letter in his hands. I watched as he read it, his face shifting from curiosity to confusion, then to anger. His hands trembled, and when he finally looked up at me, his eyes were filled with a pain I had never seen before. "How could you?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "How could you do that to him? To us?" I opened my mouth to explain, to apologize, but no words came out. What could I say? That I was lonely? That I was selfish? That I had made the biggest mistake of my life and would give anything to take it back? None of it mattered. The damage was done. Paul stood up, the letter crumpled in his fist, and walked out of the room without another word. I sat there, staring at the empty chair, feeling the weight of my choices crushing me. For weeks, Paul barely spoke to me. He moved out shortly after, saying he needed space. I understood, but it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. I had lost Scott, and now I was losing my son. May, still unaware of the truth, tried to comfort me, but her innocence only made me feel worse. I wanted to tell her, to explain, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Scott had left her a letter too, one she would read when she turned 21. I didn't know what it said, but I knew it would change everything. 10 years have passed since Scott's death, and the guilt still weighs on me like a stone. I live alone in the small apartment he left me, a constant reminder of the life we once had. Paul is grown now, living his own life, but the distance between us remains. He visits occasionally, but the warmth we once shared is gone. He looks at me differently now, with a mix of pity and resentment that cuts deeper than any words ever could. May is 17, still innocent, still unaware of the truth. She's a bright, beautiful girl, so much like her father. She talks about him often, asking me to tell her stories about the man she barely remembers. I do my best, but every word feels like a lie. I know the day is coming when she'll read Scott's letter, when she'll learn the truth about me, about us. I dread that day, but I also know I deserve it. I deserve the pain, the shame, the loneliness. Sometimes, late at night, I allow myself to imagine what could have been. If I had been stronger, if I had been faithful, if I had fought for my marriage instead of running away. But those thoughts only bring more pain. Scott is gone, and nothing can change that. All I have left are the memories of the man I loved, the life we built, and the family I destroyed. I sit by the window, staring out at the city that was once our playground. The lights twinkle like they did on our wedding night, but the magic is gone. I am alone, and I have no one to blame but myself. The tears come then, as they often do, and I let them fall. I cry for Scott, for Paul, for May, and for the woman I used to be. The woman who had everything and threw it all away. This is my story. A story of love and loss, of betrayal and regret. It's a story I wish I could rewrite, but life doesn't work that way. All I can do is live with the consequences of my actions and hope that one day my children will find it in their hearts to forgive me. But even if they do, I know I will never forgive myself.
Thank you for watching Gaby's cheating stories. Please subscribe. It just take 1 second. Thank you.